Welcome to Libyth. I'm glad you're here. This week we are in ancient Japan with the Nihongi, the chronicles of Japan. Today we look at how the Nihongi is built, the shape of its story, and what that shape means. Yesterday, we read the Nihongi together. Today I want to step back from the content and look at the architecture, not what the text says, but how it says it, what choices the compilers made in organizing this material, and what those choices reveal about the political and intellectual project the text is serving. Because in a document like the Nihongi, form is never neutral. Every structural decision is an argument. Begin with the most basic question: what kind of text is the Nihongi? And the answer is both simpler and more complicated than it appears at first. On the surface, it is a chronicle, an annalistic history, organized year by year, reign by reign, covering the period from mythological origins through the reign of Empress Jitō in 697 CE. That form is not Japanese. It is Chinese. Specifically, it follows the model of the Chinese official dynastic histories, the Zhengxi, the genre of authoritative historical writing that had been produced in China since the Shiji of Sima Qian in the 2nd century BCE. The Zhengxi were organized by reign, recorded events in chronological sequence, included tables of officials and genealogies of powerful families alongside the main narrative, and maintained a prose style that was classical, formal, and unmistakably the register of state authority. By writing in this form, in this genre, in classical Chinese, the Nihongi was asserting something that no amount of explicit declaration could have conveyed as powerfully. Japan is a civilization of the same order as China. It produces the same kind of official history. It has the same kind of annalistic record. It deserves to be read alongside the Tang histories, on the shelves of any serious scholar of East Asian civilization. The form is a credential, but the Nihongi does not simply copy the Chinese model. It adapts it, and the adaptations are as revealing as the form itself. The most significant structural feature of the Nihongi that distinguishes it from a Chinese dynastic history is the presence of variant versions, the fumi passages. Throughout the mythological sections especially, the Nihongi records the primary version of a myth, and then offers 1, 2, sometimes 5 or 6 alternative versions of the same episode, introduced with the phrase fumi nai owaku. One writing says, or another version says, the 8-headed serpent Yamata no Arachi that Susanoo slays appears in multiple versions with slightly different details. The cave episode has variant accounts. The creation of the islands has alternative genealogies. The Nihongi does not suppress these alternatives. It preserves them, labels them as alternatives, and places them alongside the primary account for the reader to see. This is a remarkable choice, and it has a specific rhetorical function. In a Chinese historical text, the inclusion of variant accounts would signal that the historian was uncertain about the correct version and was deferring to the reader's judgment. In the Nihongi, it signals the opposite. The compilers are demonstrating that they have access to more than one tradition, that they have reviewed the available sources, and that their selection of the primary version was a considered scholarly judgment rather than a naive acceptance of a single account. The fumi passages are not admissions of uncertainty. They are displays of expertise. They say, we know the alternatives, we have evaluated them, and we have chosen. That is a different relationship to the historical record than the Kojiki's approach, which simply presents one version without acknowledging that others exist. This scholarly self-consciousness runs through the entire text. The Nihongi includes dates calibrated against Chinese astronomical records, which sometimes conflict with the internal logic of the chronicle's genealogies. A conflict the compilers note without resolving, because noting the conflict demonstrates that they are engaging seriously with the evidentiary standards of continental scholarship. It cites sources explicitly, the Beakage chronicles, specific documents, in ways that the Kojiki never does. It distinguishes between things that are recorded and things that are uncertain. These are the habits of a text that knows it will be compared to foreign scholarship and wants to be found credible on those terms. The structure of the 30 volumes follows a logic that mirrors the political argument of the entire text. Volumes 1 and 2 cover the age of the gods, cosmogony, the divine genealogies, the episodes involving Amaterasu and Susanoo, and the descent of Nihongi that we recognize from the Kojiki. These volumes establish the sacred origin of the imperial line and the divine justification for its authority. They are the foundation on which everything else rests. Volumes 3 through 22 cover the legendary emperors, figures like Emperor Jimmu, the first human emperor according to the chronicle, and a succession of rulers whose reigns are recorded but whose historical reality is uncertain or wholly mythological. These volumes perform a specific chronological function. They extend the imperial genealogy back to 660 BCE, the date the Nihongi assigns to Jimmu's accession, creating a lineage of over 1,000 years by the time the chronicle reaches the historically verifiable period. That 1,000-year depth is deliberately constructed to rival the antiquity of the Chinese imperial lineage. The Chinese could point to dynasties going back to the legendary Yellow Emperor. The Nihongi provided Japan with a comparable depth of recorded history. That the dates are largely mythological was something the compilers almost certainly knew. They calibrated the impossible reigns of some legendary emperors using Chinese numerological calculations. But the argument being made was less about historical accuracy than about civilizational standing. Volumes 22 through 30 cover the historical period, the reigns from Emperor Suiko through Empress Jitō, where the chronicle becomes genuinely reliable as a historical source. The change in texture is immediate and unmistakable. Specific dates, specific diplomatic exchanges, specific names of envoys and officials and clan leaders, specific disasters and reforms and decisions. The legendary emperors of the middle volumes are recorded in a few pages each. The historical emperors of the later volumes, Tenji, Tenmu, Jitō, occupy multiple volumes each, their reigns narrated in the kind of detail that can only come from documentary sources, from archives, from the records of a functioning bureaucratic state that was keeping track of itself. That shift from mythological to historical is not presented as a shift in register or a change in the nature of the chronicle. The Nihongi presents it as simply the continuation of the same account. Gods giving way to semi-divine ancestors, giving way to human emperors, a seamless chain of descent. The formal continuity is the argument. There is no point at which the sacred origin ends and the ordinary political arrangement begins. The imperial institution that produced the Nihongi is the direct continuation of the divine order that the first volumes establish. The narrative logic of the Nihongi differs from the Kojiki's in ways that reflect its different purposes. The Kojiki's world was governed by mythic causality, symbolic acts carrying ontological weight, taboos producing cosmological consequences, the emotional state of the gods becoming material force in the landscape. The Nihongi's world, at least in its historical volumes, is governed by something closer to political causality. Rulers who govern virtuously have successful reigns. Rulers who are corrupt or negligent bring disaster on themselves and their people. Clans that support the imperial line prosper. Clans that oppose it are destroyed or absorbed. This moral causality is borrowed directly from the Chinese historiographical tradition. The Chinese dynastic histories organized historical events around the concept of the mandate of heaven. The idea that cosmic authority supported virtuous rulers and withdrew from corrupt ones. The Nihongi adapts this framework, but with a significant modification. In the Chinese system, the mandate could transfer between dynasties. In the Nihongi, it remains permanently with the imperial line descended from Amaterasu. The moral evaluation of individual rulers, and the Nihongi does evaluate its rulers, noting both virtues and errors with a candor that is one of its most distinctive features, never threatens the legitimacy of the line itself. A bad emperor is a moral failure. He is never a sign that the imperial institution has lost its divine mandate. The Chinese tool of moral historical evaluation is used without the Chinese implication that bad governance could justify dynastic overthrow. The treatment of foreign relations in the narrative logic of the Nihongi is particularly revealing. When Japan's diplomatic interactions with Tang China and the Korean kingdoms go well, when embassies are received with honor, when cultural exchanges produce knowledge and prestige, this is recorded as evidence of Japan's standing in the international order. When they go badly, when the Battle of Beakgang ends in decisive military defeat, when diplomatic letters provoke Chinese displeasure, the Nihongi records these events with an honesty that is somewhat surprising in a court-commissioned document. The defeat at Beakgang is recorded. The defensive fortifications, built in response to the fear of Tang military reprisal, are recorded. The anxiety about Japanese security in a world where the Tang Empire had just demonstrated its capacity to project military power across the sea is legible in the text even when it is not explicitly stated. The Nihongi is not simply triumphalist. It is a document that has processed real failures and incorporated them into a narrative that presents those failures as occasions for the kind of internal reorganization, the Teika reform, the Ritsuryo codification, that produced the state apparatus the Nihongi was celebrating. Tone in the Nihongi is more uniform than in the Kojiki, and that uniformity is itself significant. The Kojiki moved between registers, intimate and cosmic, wild and bureaucratic, lyric and annalistic, because it was assembled from oral traditions that carried their own distinct voices. The Nihongi is written in a consistent classical Chinese prose style that is formal, measured, and authoritative throughout. Even the mythological sections, which cover the same episodes as the Kojiki's emotionally immediate narratives, are rendered in the Nihongi's even, scholarly register. Izanagi and Izanami descend to the floating bridge of heaven and stir the ocean with the jeweled spear. The text notes the variant versions. The islands are born. The procedure is described with the same formal tone that will be used, hundreds of pages later, to record the dispatch of an embassy to Tang China or the promulgation of a legal code. That tonal consistency is a form of argument. It says, the mythological origin and the historical present are part of the same continuous record. There is no gap between them, No change in the kind of evidence being used or the kind of claims being made, because there is no gap in the chain of descent between the gods who created the world and the emperors who administer it. The formal uniformity of the prose is the textual expression of the political claim that sacred origin and present governance are the same thing. The poetic insertions, the songs and waka poems that punctuate the prose, as they do in the Kojiki, appear in the Nihongi as well, but their function is slightly different. In the Kojiki, the embedded poems often feel like the most direct and emotionally immediate passages in the text, eruptions of lyric feeling within the narrative. In the Nihongi, they are more clearly marked as documents, quoted as part of the historical record, with the same documentary status as a diplomatic letter or an imperial decree. They are evidence of what a particular emperor said or felt in a particular moment, preserved in the archive alongside everything else. The Nihongi treats its poems like its myths. They are historical data to be recorded and evaluated, not oral eruptions of a living tradition. The silences of the Nihongi are different in character from those of the Kojiki. Where the Kojiki was silent about Buddhism, about China and Korea, about the common people, silences that reflected the Kojiki's purpose as a document of indigenous sacred authority, the Nihongi is conspicuously not silent about most of those things. Buddhism is present throughout. Foreign relations are documented extensively. The voices of the common people are still largely absent, but the legal codes that regulate their lives are recorded, and the administrative mechanisms by which the state interacts with them. Taxation, conscription, corvée labor, the hand-in-land distribution system are described in some detail. The significant silences of the Nihongi are different. It is silent about the inner workings of the processes by which myths were selected and versions chosen. The editorial labor that produced the text is invisible in the text itself. It is silent about the perspectives of the clans whose power was broken or diminished by the centralizing project. The Soga are recorded as villains whose overthrow was necessary and just, without any engagement with the tradition of accomplishment and patronage that made them indispensable to the court for generations. It is silent about the ordinary human cost of the civil wars it records. The Jinshin War is described as a military-political event with winners and losers and strategic decisions, not as a catastrophe experienced by the populations in whose territories the armies moved. The Nihongi's silences are the silences of institutional history, the silences of a document produced by the state to explain the state to itself and to the world. Compared to other founding chronicles of the ancient world, the Nihongi's most distinctive feature is its combination of formal ambition and scholarly self-consciousness. The Roman annals tradition, the Chinese Zhengxi, the Sanskrit Puranas, all of these produced documents of comparable ambition and comparable state function. What distinguishes the Nihongi from most of them is the explicit inclusion of variant versions, the engagement with foreign sources, and the acknowledgement of diplomatic failure alongside diplomatic success. These features make the Nihongi feel less like propaganda and more like scholarship, even though, like all official history, it is both simultaneously. That's all for today on Libyth. Now we turn to the characters, the figures who carry the Nihongi, and what they reveal about the world that produced it. If you want to follow the whole journey, subscribe, a new book every week. At least we try.